You're listening to the groundbreaking community stream. Hi, this is Q live and direct from Delhi. I hope everyone's having a good time and you're taking care of yourself. I'm taking this opportunity to talk a little about mental health and wants to give you a reminder that talking about your feelings can help you stay in good mental health and deal with times such as now when you feel troubled. And it's not a sign of weakness. It's in fact a part of taking charge of your well being and doing whatever you can to stay healthy. Also, go through the description where we've tried to make it a little resourceful. And if you have any feedback, you can shoot me a mail mentioned in the podcast description. For today's episode, we have Abu Shaikh, who is a multidisciplinary designer and currently working as a project manager at Sahay and a co-team member at Chlp by SOCHARA, which is an organization works on community health awareness research and action. Throughout his career, he has worked with design agencies like For People London to providing design solutions to real estate and creative design brands, and also been teaching students about design thinking. Welcome to the show, Abu. What's up?
Hi, excited, I would say. I think I've heard some of the previous podcasts, some very interesting people. I'm glad I'm in the mix.
Cheers, cheers. How's it going with you? It's a Sunday there, and how's it going with you? What's up? How's your day like?
I'm just happy I'm taking this Sunday off because last Sunday I was kind of intensely working. It was a project launch on the previous Monday, in fact. So I'm just happy I've decided not to work in that sense.
Yeah.
But I think work has been exciting. I think it feels like I'm in the right zone in terms of where I wanted to be in a lot of ways, in terms of the kind of impact areas and also the kind of design that I think I am very keen to sort of invest myself into. So yeah, in general, in a good spot, I would say.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. We'll start about your design journey. You studied in Bangalore most of your life, is that I know. And how did you go to choose a design school, and what was in your mind when?
Yeah, a brief correction. I did not do all my schooling in Bangalore. In fact, I was
Okay, I don't know
I
that.
have I was in UP till 8th standard, and I think came here in 9th and 12th. I was in Bangalore. And then in 12th, I took BCom in Christ College for 1 year. And I thought maybe I'll just do this and then.
I didn't know I didn't know about this man like before this. Maybe
I think not a lot of people know. So I sort of did 6 months of that and realized this is not my thing. I think that at the same time, I kind of heard about DSK and car design, and I was always drawing sketches in cars and stuff like that. In 11th, 12th standard, and I got a lot of appreciation from all my colleagues and classmates at that time. So I think it got me thinking maybe this is the thing I would like to do. So I think 6 months in, I'm like, BCom is certainly not my thing. And this is why I discovered DSK and came to Pune, visited the campus, and give an exam. And yeah, there you go. And then I was like, shift to there's like a different all new world, you could say.
And why transportation design and not product?
To be honest, at that time I was just very naive. I was so unaware about design as a sphere. I just loved. I thought I could do this one thing really well. At least at that young age, I thought so. And I saw some investment internally to sort of find ways to improve myself on that particular skill set. So I think for those reasons, early naivety, also this sort of it's a very glamorous space, isn't it, to be a car designer. I think the glamour got me involved, and I was hooked for a while. So yeah, there you go. So I think that kind of what was the reason why sort of I got into this car design scene in the first, whatever education scene in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's the case with most of us. The glamour behind design and how the final product looks. Awesome.
Yeah.
How was that for you? How was the traditional method of sketching and the process was for you? Were you how did you adapt for it?
I think it was I mean, I think I prepared too hard for design school and in isolation. That meant I learned a lot of bad habits in sketching, in approaching design, which got me thinking maybe I know already before I entered design school, and that took some unlearning to happen. But I think in general, the design process itself is very fascinating, and I think the first masterclass was such an oh, it's a masterclass. Sorry, the first project that we did on basic design in year one, the first few ones was like almost like an eye opener, in so many ways. And I think I kind of knew that I had something that I could hold on to in terms of storytelling, and sketching were kind of my two areas that I thought maybe I can really I have, and I those are my initial starting strengths, you could say. Yeah, I think then it was a bit of an up and down for me. I think initially started off really well in year one, but I think because this learning process was still going on, I had to sort of slow down, and sort of there were a lot of internal barriers that I had to face, and all of that meant it can sort of stabilized or even stagnated for a bit. But school pressure meant that you had to pick those skills up and build upon. So I think sketching was so always my liking and always became my tool to go for. And I invested a lot of energy. So I think yeah, I just loved sketching and still continue to do so in different ways.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing you sketching so much, and by the time I met you, your skill level was already so good, and I also seen you consistently working on it. Um, yeah, for how was the foundation year was like for you, when you were understanding more about the commercial side of design, and not something what you are doing right now, for example. Yeah, because I think you were doing pretty good in that phase.
Yeah, I was doing decent. I would say, yeah. I mean, I was doing pretty decent for I was not sort of certainly not the best, but I was not, I mean, doing too bad also. But I was actually, for me, it was never about, there's a lot of internal space that was created in me to sort of explore and understand. And I think I was so keen to really define design in my own terms. That means I was trying to grasp it. And often I would sit and think what design is not. What is the outer boundary? Am I becoming an engineer, or what is an engineer? What is a designer? So in me, those questions are very powerful internally. I mean, of course, these are not things that I've really shared or talked about to my friends as well, in our classmates. But these are very powerful questions that really held on to me. So for me, the journey was very internal in that sense, where I was really absorbing things, and I was trying to find my own definitions and versions of what this looks like, and what is that I am really enjoying in the entire process. So first 2 years in that regard was very, very interesting for me, even though, I mean, the outer realm, you could say, the academics part of it was not exactly up to the mark. But it's a lot of fun because there's a lot of space to, to, for the first time, I was also confronted to unlearn my learning habits, or I didn't have any learning habits before. It was a lot of teaching habits that I didn't have it, like कि तुम पहले पढ़ाओगे मुझे, you will teach me first and I'll just regurgitate that further.
Yeah.
But this whole idea of learning on the go was such a radical shift for me. So there was a lot of trying to calibrate myself with that approach in that sense. I think the first 2 years really went in trying to understand your approach to how should I approach this entire process in the first place. So it may not be evident in the outside world, but I think for my internal self, it was massive. It was a big shift and space creation inside was happening.
When you mention about unlearning your habits, what is that? Is that because as you mentioned that you need to get you need to have something in mind first to go for it, right? So
yeah,
what
so for example,
do you mean when you say
very simple thing? Yeah, these are very simple things about how to approach sketching or learning sketching. Uh, Often you're not told the processes in explicit terms, right? And it's there, but it's not really explicit. So you build your own models of you always start with a bad mental model of how to approach things, right? So because you have had a what do you think is a head start before starting college, like 6 months of just sitting and sketching by yourself, you build certain patterns about how to approach this in a certain way. In terms of, for example, you would say, what, if I were to really draw a car, if I were to be a car designer, then it would mean that I have to learn that specific car so well that I could be blind and draw the car and replicate that. So that's a very terrible mental model, to be honest, in some sense. When I realized that later, to be honest, because it just meant I was teaching my hands a lot of rote lines that became repetitive across the board. It was not giving me a really toolbox to work with. It was one scissor, you could say, and I was cutting everything that was coming to me. It could be a cloth, it could be a brick, but I was applying the same scissor in that sense. So it was the sort of the so in some sense, that was a rote mechanisms that I sort of built up, and slowly but surely I was trying to break them down. And eventually I realized and had my own approach to sketching, I would say, in terms of, I need to break down sketching into lines, shapes, volumes, and circles and stuff like that. And that kind of aided me to reconstruct, or first deconstruct what I thought sketching looks like, and then reconstruct my own approach to it, which I think really helped me sort of grow in the process. And even if I was slow and deliberate in and being behind in some aspects, or really cleaning up my lines, for example, but I realized by that time that this is actually quite key. So it's okay that if I'm not in the same boat as everybody else. So I was kind of conscious about those aspects in my foundation.
Yeah, that's so true, man. Because the time we enter the design schools, there's this kind of a competitive kind of an environment where you just need to keep on sketching and get better at the craft, sometimes without even knowing why are you even doing it. So I think that's also even the students should need to know about the fact that sketching is not something where you should put a lot of time in, but also where you want to see yourself and what kind of segment of design you like. But yeah, this is a foundation year, so we still have a lot of time to fail, I think, right? So it's so what was your state in mind when you were like approaching towards design studios for your internships and jobs in third year, to be specific?
So I think in third year, I think by that time I gave this some sort of consciousness about what I don't want to do. Early third year, I would say, or sort of towards second year, late second year, early third year. And I was starting to realize that car design actually is not my scene, to be honest, because it often felt like I was leaving a lot of my personal experiences and knowledge of growing up in a certain culture, and sort of leaving all of that behind and cutting myself off to learn something, absorb something that's really outside me in that sense, and hope to create something entirely new and sort of distinct. So that was kind of a internal failure I saw, at least. I don't see it's a failure now, but in that moment I saw it as that. So I was consciously trying to move away. But third year was really tricky, because in third year, what was really happening was things were sort of, you are sort of so bound by the context around you in terms of, having to perform and all of that, and having to fit into a certain radar, or, or have that cool internship. Actually, my head was a little loose, I would say. So I allowed myself that space to be like open, and come what may, I'll take it up. And then internship happened. I had a very interesting internship. I wouldn't say it was something I had assumed I would do. So it was a marketing and storytelling internship on paper. So I was like 3 months here in Pune, hosted by a partner organization. And 1 month I was in Hong Kong. So my boss or mentor was this professor of applied psychology in Hong Kong Poly U. And he had this sort of side gig, you could almost call it, in a digital design agency. So I think that that sort of shift, what really changed, and what was the most shift happened to me was in his psychology class. I think in the entire 4-month period, it was that one psychology class. I'm like, oh, wow, this is fascinating. This is something I really tasted, something that I thought I was looking at, or was looking for, in terms of there's a lot of existential questioning that is happening in the class. What is the self? Who is this I? And I was like, oh, wow. I mean, I had never sort of thought taking this route, but this is certainly very intriguing and interesting. Very cosmic crowd, some Russian in a Hong Kong setting, some Indians, Russians, and very few of them, of course. The large majority was from the mainland, or around the mainland area, and Hong Kong, of course. So yeah, I think it was quite interesting experience. I mean, that setting, or meeting those people from a different culture and different setting, was actually kind of a big learning space for me. So I think it was just, I think for me, it felt like I was, because I was not in a setting where I could be comparative. XYZ had similar kind of studio, I did not. So it dropped my need to be comparative in my lens to how I see myself. And I think that really liberated me in so many ways. That said, okay, I just need to go in and figure out my own strengths and look at my journey and not be bothered about how the world sees me, how I see the world, to be honest, because it didn't matter. As long as whatever was leading me to growth, actually I was just chasing that from there onwards. I think it was massive. What seemed like, very trivial on the outside, I think internally it was quite massive as a space.
Yeah, and in the phase you wanted to go to some place like that, or it just happened? This is Asia Digital Mojo, right?
Yes, this is Asia. I wouldn't say it was. I wouldn't say I was conscious about it, because that'll be a false statement. I wasn't. I was just open, because it was just a little hard to get internships, to be honest. And this happened to come across. Okay, it's the case, then let's go with it. And allowed myself to be open. I was not trying to be like, box myself and be rigid. And say, okay, no, this is not what I wanted, and XYZ. So I had to drop all those notions also. I think that also sort of was a good learning and resilience as well, in that sense of how, if things are not according to you, you still accept and learn to work with that in some sense. So it is pretty cool in that. And when I look back now.
Yeah, but you had a really good design projects in your portfolio. So I think you could have gotten to any design studio you would wanted. But yeah, sometimes it's also about the time. It's about the right time. So what kind of projects you worked on in your time in Asia Digital Mojo?
I mean, we were working on very interesting, and there was like literally retail exhibition stores. There was creating digital marketing, physical digital marketing spaces in a jewelry retail chain in Hong Kong. And there was one to do with an exhibition for a big real estate project. It was again a digital experiential project in that sense, and there were some partners, some artists on the side. And my role was to do a lot of storyboarding, a lot of ideation, and what we could do, and all of that, and making pitch decks happen, and so on and so forth. It was a bit of that. So I think I got exposed to that kind of world where digital marketing spaces. Although I was not dealing with the vendors and sort of final production of it, I was more on the ideation front. But it was actually physical digital experiences, if I have to really say that. So these were screens, these were hands-free magic mirrors. I don't know if you've heard about that. There's also this tool where there was a headband neurotransmitter based, which if you like apparently meditate, the fan switches on, the light switches on, some sort of funky things on that front.
Yeah, that really sounds fascinating. Like meditating into a space design, and also when you're marketing your product at the same time. So once you were back from this internship and were doing long projects and other design projects, how did this experience help you? And what was your state of mind when like after doing such space design projects, how did it help you into your the next phase of your design journey?
Oh, I think it was pretty massive because I think as I said, design in general is a very competitive space. The way you are actually navigating your own self is how you can differentiate. And that was my mindset. How can I differentiate? And my tool of differentiation is what can I bring distinct from my own being, so that this differentiation is not inauthentic in that sense. So that is my sort of internal roadmap looked like that. And this meant I was, of course, didn't do anything like the others did. When I came back, I think it gave me a lot of openness in my head, first of all, to look at design not just from a car, not just from you could say just from the product point of view, but from the experience, the vastness of the experience itself. From zone one to, you could say point A to point B, and even sort of the journey of purchase, for example, because I was dealing with retail and all of that. So that kind of really helped me open and shape my brain actually more. I think for the first time I got a lot of courage also to even change my interest from exterior to interior. And for the first time, I was also open to do other products, so not just be bound to cars at all. In fact, I was thinking towards the end of the third year. Sorry, there's a lot of disturbance in the background, so I'll edit that out. But at the end of the third year, I was actually thinking that maybe it's I could try product design. I could shift in product design. So in fact, I was considering at the end of third year, maybe, dude, I just want to do product design. In fact, I had a conversation with Guillaume and so my HOD at that point, I think it was Thomas.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think so they're pretty open and okay, but I felt really reluctant because I felt too radical and too flag end of my sort of learning phase. So I felt just maybe incrementally change it. So I went for, let's say, bike project, and this is I think early fourth year, or I think something like that. I think I worked with Pardesi on that bike project, which I think was a fun project. It made me realize again a lot of things about team management, things about how to sometimes also take the backseat when you don't know enough. It's also important. So to know when to give space to the other to take lead. So amongst that was the people part of it. Of course, I learned about bikes and how it's so much more mechanically tightened up with ergonomics. So because in my head, I was like, the shift when it happened to user experience in third year, it is also the shift to say a human-centric in a lot of ways. So those key terms was my driving factor to do product design as well. That was the only reason why I was trying to shift to that realm also. In fact, I remember in third year, there was a masterclass which we were not supposed to be part of. I think end of second year, early third year. I think Julian Saramajon had come down. This guy, our senior who had got a job in BMW that time, and he came down and he was doing a masterclass. And so some of us, because we were not bound, we had our own free time in college, as you know, in classrooms. So we just sat in this sort of master class for the seniors for the batch above, and he was asking us about what is that you can bring in, and what is your personal strength and all that. What is a personal project how do you go deeper in your own self and bring something out that's very distinct? And that's why human-centric and human-centered, experience-based stuff was kind of the key labels I thought I should work with. So that was a massive shift in year 3 in that sense. I was trying to do that kind of project. So post year 3, I was like doing a bike project and all of that. And if you see the trajectory from that, I was not doing exteriors at all. This was kind of I thought so. In that cohort was my strength. Of course, in the larger industry, it's not the case for sure.
Yeah, as far as I know, you were killing into the automotive design scene and got listed into top 10 design projects in Siam, right? It's the same year?
Yeah. Oh, that's a 5th year thing.
Oh yeah, it's a 5th year. And also the Michelin design project. I would let's talk about it also. So like at this stage, as you said, you were planning to shift to more human-centered design projects, but still managed to to nail the traditional automotive design scene. How was the Michelin design project was for you? This is 5th year, right?
Oh, it was. Yeah, it was 5th. It was amazing. I think there were two things at that point I thought maybe is my combination that I think is very important for me was people-oriented things and of course automotive at that time. That was a combination I was really looking at. And Michelin project, the brief sit like right at the center of it. It was about designing a sort of a product for the underprivileged communities and stuff like that. So I think we went. So I was like, okay, and I was like so keen to learn design research and all of the other aspects. So yeah. Anyways, I think Michelin for me was actually that center I was looking at people and sort of automotive, being people centric and doing anything in automotive realms at that point was kind of very interesting for me. And I think I was kind of doing, I got interested in design research by that time. And I thought this is a perfect opportunity for us to do design research and also execution and try to do sort of the project in that direction. So I think we did a project for underprivileged communities in India. This is the brief we chose. And we traveled. It was fun because we went to the village nearby and we went to Latur also to Kushal Thakur's we were very warmly received by his parents, very, very nice people. And we went to see the farmlands near the waste. There's literally a mountain of waste. And we went to the farms nearby, and the effect of that mountain of waste. And I say mountain, I really mean it. It is literally like, you would say, like a 5-story building, even higher than that. It is all waste. And if you walk down the
This is
village
Latur
nearby,
you're talking about.
this is Latur, yeah, that specific area in Latur, it stunk like crazy. It is, and when you went to the pea gardens nearby, and we plucked the pods there, and saw the pea pods and the number of peas in that versus when we went to Kushal's farm or something that where it is more organically grown, and we saw the distinction very clearly. How these external geographies are playing a role. So I think even the project did not take that direction of not strictly that direction. But I think all these learnings were very, very heavy for us. And we realized that, livelihoods is a very key factor to consider. You're talking about seasonal farming, and farming itself is a very unstable source of income. So how do you make something that's very, very sort of, adapt to this environment? And in our own naive sense, they built like a modular vehicle, which is kind of with the end goal of generating more income. So that's the human angle that was really brought in, and that really sort of drove. So we call it Mobility Plus. We sort of branded it Mobility Plus. So of course, moving is important, but what more? So the plus was in that sense the vehicle. We also saw other issues of ambulance access and all of that. So we combined all these sort of wild ideas together and said, hang on. In fact, we had some other stories as well. We had a migrant story where we were trying to, because there were a lot of seasonal migration happening. So can we make like a home on wheels kind of thing? There were also young children who were struggling to go to schools and stuff like that. So we're trying to combine school-based needs on a sort of a small sort of transportation vehicle, which again a cyclish, nothing that was too radical, and linking it to education initiatives. Say that could there be a combination of reinventing the wheel, of this so something like that. So it could be a combination of an event plus vehicle and things like that. So it was a very fun sort of creative box of ideas we came up with, and eventually we settled with this. In this world, what is most reasonable, at least, because all these are much more wilder in that sense. So we came up with this sort of interesting vehicle where, the wheel was quite interesting itself, that we tried to break the cost on the wheels itself. So if it were modular, you don't have to replace the entire wheel, only one part could be replaced, and that means the cost of maintenance reduces in that sense. And it was a multi-purpose vehicle. There's a very obvious solution, now that I think of it, but also some very obvious, in combination with some very non-obvious use cases. So this was an ambulance, which was connected. It was a connected vehicle to Google Loon project that we discovered that we were trying to create access of internet in rural areas. So I think we combined all this sort of crazy wild ideas. That kind of won a first prize in Michelin, which is kind of big thing apparently. So it is a fun project. It was.
I think it was the first time an Indian team won that prize, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, I think so.
It was a big deal for sure.
Yeah, and for people outside, something else was a big deal. But for me, it was not the prize itself, but the act of going and meeting people and doing the project, and still realizing it is actually it's kind of crap and doesn't really solve the issue at hand in any way. That realization was actually much bigger than this act of getting an award, which I think anyway I've not been. You could say I'm not extrinsically driven in my motivations.
In this time, I think I was doing a project with Swati. So we were doing a project for a public transportation system, and you also used to come in between and helped us with the brainstorming. So that was a time where I also got to learn a lot from you, and the power of storytelling and having empathy into design, especially when you are trying to solve a problem through design. So, how much do you think storytelling is important for the young?
Oh, it's massive. We don't realize storytelling is actually an act of articulation. It underpins having understood. It underpins that having processed information well, and having to consolidate it in a certain way. Storytelling is an output, but all that processes underneath are very, very massive. and something like Swati and Shala for that matter. I mean, they did they were amazing at this stuff, to be honest. In fact, in my portfolio in London, when it's like final portfolio, I called. I mean, me and Zain called her up, and Trishala also, and they kind of helped us to link our own stories and that's to make it more cohesive and interesting. It's quite massive. I mean, it's now cliche also. It's kind of understood in the design world in a lot of ways that storytelling is actually very important. Uh, but it may be a cliche for us in the design universe, but for those outside, is actually the world is not sort of driven by stories so much. In large, it is actually driven by it, but people don't not necessarily bind to that idea so much. So it's still, even if it's a cliche, it's a worthwhile cliche to hold on to and still perpetuate that, because you can talk about in 100 people, 4 of them, 40% people don't have enough income. But when you put a face to that, when you put a struggle to that, it's very real. That's very relatable in a human lived experience. Like, I mean, this means that he's living on a hillock in a rural area in Madhya Pradesh, which means he doesn't, no ambulance can come to this place, right? And then sort of from there onwards, the fact that he's scared to not access COVID care because he's so scared that if he goes, first of all, he'll be turned COVID positive, and then the burden of cost in terms of so he's actually scared for 2 years, 2 months. He's just ridden on his bed, not seeking support, because if he seeks it, it's going to kill him economically in that sense. So I think storytelling is actually a tool of gaining larger insights in people's lives. Is not to look at people as data points. It's not to say that people are, this many people are this way, they behave this way, but it's actually also a tool to break boundaries about and boxes of how we see them, how we see things actually. Because in a story, you can layer so many complexities. Like in one single story, you can talk about the entire healthcare system being so problematic, how region plays a role in access to healthcare, how cost plays a role, how quality of care plays a role from the service providers, health providers, how lack of public systems plays a role in a single story of one person on a hillock, right? You can tell everything in a single go. But if you do that in a sort of in other frameworks, which you can loosely say is database, I don't think it does the same kind of justice that a story would do in bringing out the real challenges of people in that sense. Because I mean, in design, the storytelling is largely a tool of understanding, right? It's a tool of empathizing, and also, of course, it's on the industrial and commercial end of it, it's also a tool to propagate value or convince people this is valuable for you to buy and all of that. So, anyways, so it is definitely a very, very high. And I think maybe you've not asked me this question, but I think there's so much learning from my colleagues in this entire my classmates in the 5-year process. So many different personas. You have Mario on one edge, Sainath, who was he jumped start ahead of us through his own sheer brilliance and will, you could say, in that sense. There was Pardesi, who did things in a different style. There was Akshay, Biani, who did. There's Swati and Vishala, of course, in their own ways. Of course, I connected a lot with Swati in my work sphere because I think our ideas and virtues in terms of how to approach design matched a lot. So it was. So there's a lot of learning from all these people, to be honest. And there was like different stories, if I have to use the previous question of yours, to draw inspiration from of how they approach things and different lenses. So I think that was one of the major factors of my growth, was also that we had this very well-knit cohort, which sort of sat together, thought things together, sort of gave feedback in a nice way, and was very encouraging, to say the least, and very supportive. So I think storytelling is also, as I said, is a tool to certainly articulate your understanding, and you can only do good storytelling if you've understood things well. So it forces you to follow a certain track, and having other kinds of storytellers around you is very powerful because you have different lenses to look at the same object per se, right? So I think it's pertinent in any field. Design is only one field in the world. In any field, I think it's quite.
Yeah, man. Well said, Abu. Like throughout this time, when you were doing projects, you were also taking courses from Coursera, and I think also Swati mentioned me about a project, a course you did with her about system practice, right?
Yeah.
So
I think the Coursera revolution was just for me, it started up in third year, fourth year. I think folks like Bhavna, Aman, at one point Mario, Swati, Trishala, all of us kind of got together at some point to do like HCD. IDU had this project, I think, open IDU.
Yeah.
.org is a design kit course. I think we kind of took that up. We never completed it, but a lot of my research skills or kind of preliminary, I was actually found myself more fascinated by all these factors more than the academic part of my education. Not so much there. In fact, no, there were reasons for it, because in around about second or third year, we didn't have any faculty in college. I mean, I don't know if you recall. So we had to run our own experiments to draw our own learning. So we started this something called Sketching Saturday, where we invited seniors, and me and Mark kind of initiated that initially. But it became everybody's as soon as everybody got onto the idea. So I think we tried to invite on Saturdays. We had seniors to teach us about sketching, presentations, and so much we learned actually. So I think I digress, but yeah. So the courses and alternative learning modalities, I would say. So I wouldn't just say courses, but so your peers, the online courses available, and then just sort of just seniors became very important tool of learning, and it was quite massive. It was more than what your teachers taught. Of course, it was important what the trainers taught you, but these guys also, there was so much to learn because they were in the same journey, just a little ahead. So it's easier to access in that sense.
Yeah.
And this specific course in Coursera was powerful. But this course, the systems practice course, happened much later. This is when I started to think very clearly and strictly about mental health and mental health for children, to be very specific. And I said, maybe I don't want to be loose about it. So let me find ways to streamline my learning strategies. And I took up this course, and Swati kind of also somehow sort of got onto this course somehow. So we kind of shared ideas. Okay, let's just do this together. She was in Croatia and I was on the ground. And I thought maybe I just want to experiment on the ground and not just be airy about it. So I started working in this after-school center. I got hooked onto it, the center later on. But we were trying to sort of look at the ground and draw some learnings and look at some theoretical worlds also about child development, all of that. And the environment that I was dealing with in immediate sense. And we were trying to map a system around what factors leads to, or what barriers cause lack of child development, of whole child development. There's a sort of, again, I don't truly know the academic framework that exists, but again, maybe for our audience, it may not be so worthwhile. But we try to sort of map those things. It was powerful. I think that for me, that was that is where I really realized my best learning strategy. And in this world of super adaptive environment, which I also triggered myself to enter always, to not keep myself safe in a comfort zone. This learning strategies became the key, because we had you had an actionable framework, which was the course itself, which told you week 1 do this, week 2 do that, and you had actual action on the ground. You reflected and you iterated as you went. So I think it's called praxis. I think for me it was quite massive. This course, of course, Swati was. I realized that she was very articulate instead of being able to do the mapping itself. She was. This map maybe I could share with you sometime later. But something I felt. I still feel something. I'm certainly proud to be part of. I should do the heavy lifting on the mapping itself, and I was kind of the ground researcher. You could call it somebody on the ground who could bring real stories and real case studies to really sort of bring credibility to all this mapping. Yeah, I think it's systems practice. I think for me is like a newfound fascination. They're like, again, I can go in details without jumping in details, but like soft systems thinking, there's hard systems thinking. There are different worldviews, and soft systems is more like people and interactions and how things emerge from that interactions. And hard systems thinks more like engineering, like stocks and flows and inputs and outputs. And it is a tool to understand your context. It is a tool to navigate systemic change in your context. I think it's super potent if you are a design strategist or whatever that kind of label you want to attach yourself with. Something like these, things like these as an additional toolkit is super powerful, because it situates your design process in a certain setting very, very well. So yeah, I think it was. It still is my. I see it defines my worldview still in a lot of ways, and that's how I approach things right now also.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Do you also recommend such courses to designers who are studying and want?
Oh, absolutely. No doubt about it. I think, in fact, complexity is something we'll deal with. And the pace of change is so massive. If you don't have your owned, when I say owned, that you have really understood your own learning processes, and systems practice would be one course that you can choose to do. But if you don't have that as in your toolkit as an approach, then I think you're going to be struggling a lot, because adaptiveness is key, I would say, in life, in growth in general. You have to be adaptive. I think additional toolkits allow you to become cognitively flexible, to sometimes even say this is not a design problem to solve, right?
Yeah.
This is where design stops. So I think it told me where to draw the boundaries, and not to become so enmeshed and in sort of celebrating what the design universe and being sort of, you could say, self-affirming and celebratory, like, oh, this is it, this is the thing that which is a tendency that I had certainly when I was doing human-centered design. But it tells you to drop it and say, hang on, there's a boundary beyond which it may not go, and you have to actually not use something else to apply. So I think in that sense, it allows you to be cognitively flexible. So you don't end up then blaming, oh, that person doesn't understand design. That person, they're just not, we have to educate them. But then you start realizing, hang on, I mean, maybe this doesn't apply. You just because you have hammer, you're nailing everything out there, right? So that's kind of thinking may happen with a single tool. And design is a single tool in the world of tools, like all of the sort of academic disciplines and whatever, or practice disciplines, are actually different tools you can apply. Technology being one of them, for sure.
In the process of learning all these skill sets they ask you to do and put it in your portfolio, you forget about the intangible information to become a better designer. So I think such courses helps you to really nurture yourself as a designer. And I also started this course which you also did, which was Cradle to Cradle, products for the circular economy, but I couldn't complete it. That is also one hell of a course. So yeah, I think people who are listening and trying to have an edge into design should absolutely go for such courses.
I also give credit to Aman here. In fact, to be honest, he was the person who kind of who started on the journey much before than I did, of this online course thing on Coursera and everything else. I think as for me, that definitely became a starting point for me to sort of gain access to it, and then sort of I mean, of course, our journeys kind of took their own shape and form. So I think that is certainly, I mean, he certainly was also one of those people in his initial sort of time. He was kind of course, he was too alternate in my opinion, and may still be, but again, that's for the world to decide in that sense.
Yeah. So after that, after this phase, you started applying again for the real world, and you went into 4People, which was based in London, right?
Yeah. So let me correct the timeline. The systems practice course happens much later. At the end of 5th year, I say I want to be a multidisciplinary designer, human-centered. Yeah. And I want to work at the sort of multidisciplinary agency. And 4People it was mysterious. Two really interesting people from our college went there, Simo and Avian. And okay, this sounds like a fun place, and they do like all kinds of aircraft, and maybe that meant it. For me, automotive skill was only a gateway to enter the product world at that time. Yeah. And they were doing a lot of products as well, with Coca-Cola, with some hair products. I mean, beauty brands in the US, and lots of other things that they've been into. So I got into 4People luckily, and it's so fascinating because the mentor a guy I really looked up to, his portfolio I had saved, ended up being my mentor. So imagine the pressure, first of all. Oh shit, this guy is so good, and I'm not good enough in that sense. But it is such a warm guy. I mean, Christoph Prosler. So that is like, oh, that's super interesting. And I think I got to. I mean, I've been lucky that way. That I think what I sort of thought I would want to do, and I have been able to. Of course, there are always degrees to which you can do things in terms of your own sort of. But that's what the best, I mean, that could happen is so that I spent 1 year in 4People. It was a 6-month internship, and it became +6 because this project was going on the automotive project. So I stuck around, but I was very clear that my original intent was not being met. So I asked my organization and 4People in this case, guys, can you put me on product design, because this is what I came for. I don't want to be doing cars. So happens so it's just happened so, like, to be honest, I mean, I did not go with the intent of doing cars. I was saying maybe aircrafts, maybe something else. But there came a car project, I think Neo, I don't know if you heard about that brand. For people kind of did a lot of initial groundwork of brand building and the interior design and setting up this brand framework, would say, happened at four people.
Yeah.
And I was there right from the start of it, right from sending my sketches to be part of the pitch, which meant to Neo's design director of that time and the founder, William Lee. Of course, Chris's sketch was a lot more than mine. To having started to setting up the server in the room and into it. My sort of third year internship, which opened me to user experience, I was doing that work in fifth year as well. This was not just a car, it was user experience across the board. Yeah, it was like a scratch project. So there's a lot to learn when the project is starting from scratch. It was massive in that sense. Yeah, it is. I really felt like, I mean, of course, there was a more internal gap there that I felt I was not being good enough, being able to offer much. I'm forgetting often that I'm only an intern. But regardless of that, it was like a massive sort of, learning in so many ways about how to approach that kind of design. I mean, for people as an agency is ace at what they do. You may not agree to it because they may work with some, in my opinion, unethical companies like Coca-Cola. But they are like a fascinating company in terms of just the kind of 360 approach they have designed. They were doing right from the logo to brand values to the architectural, everything was done by these guys. So in a truly holistic project for developing a brand, I was actually played a tiny role in that. So it was a massive learning experience. I think it's quite cool.
No, I think it sounds really interesting. And as you mentioned that transportation design wasn't something you wanted to do there, but you were all this time you were studying transportation design, right? So for a person who opted, like for a person like me, I opted for something which I realized that that was not something I wanted to do. But also in the journey, it gives me a lot of information, and also the people around me help me to how do brace yourself when you are in the situation and you are kind of scared. Okay, now I've studied and spent this much time into specializing something, and now I that is not something I really want to do. So how do you eliminated that feeling and pushed yourself to do what you wanted?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. It was certainly not easy, right? But I think there's my interest in psychology that helped. I remember reading this book by Daniel Kahneman. I forget the name of the book, but I think it's a very famous. I think most of you might have heard about it. It talked about this fallacy of you having paid for a really bad meal at a restaurant, and the cost is already done because the virtue you're sitting in the chair and eating had the first morsel. You've lost your worth of penny already, but you continue to eat it, believing that this is actually, I mean, I'm losing, but you don't realize the cost that lies ahead of you. So it was actually an act of balance that I had to sort of deal with in that sense. Hang on, of course, there's going to be some loss in terms of immediate being able to apply the skills, but the cost of not having the shift was way higher. The cost of growth is much higher than the cost of loss of what you've done so far. So for me, transformation as a theme was never too hard. I was always keen to transform and rethink and break down and reconstruct. So it was definitely not easy. In fact, that is why probably I stuck on to this theme in back of my head, even if I was doing different things. So I don't think there's a hard line where you can say I stop here and I shift. For me, it has been a gradual process of experiments, and it's a process of learning what I do not want. All this while, I think for me, like the way I thought of it is that, I mean, if I'm doing this design project where I'm creating a bunch of ideas and eliminating them one by one, it's choosing by elimination is the approach we usually take in design by setting some frameworks of filtering it. And I was like, why isn't that for careers I'm able to do it? It's a very simple idea, right? We're applying it here. Why isn't it in my design career? It's such a irrational thing that you're learning this, but you're not applying this to the way you approach your own career in that sense.
Yeah.
So for me, it became like a tool of filtering out or elimination. Okay, multidisciplinary design studios, product design. Okay, I don't think this is working out for me. I tried a bit of UX in the real estate world of branding and UX, and I realized this also the kind of thing I was looking for. This is not that as well. And I think this series of experimentations, you could call it, or you could also say, or some may also see it as deviation, but it's up to them to see it like that. Told me what not to do and what I do not want, and that sort of list became easy. I think at some point I had to take a jump. It's a jump of faith and giving to the calling as well. I think I said maybe mental health. At this, I think I definitely realized that mental health and was like a big piece that I think I realized that this is under addressed, but actually literally an epidemic before this epidemic happened. Is mental health, and it's massive. I said maybe I just want to do that. Let me start. Let me just not wait and sort of hold on to this old idea of what I have done so far and what I'm losing, but also look at what I'm gaining. So I think all that process really helped me make that shift. Of course, there's a lot of internal motivation that played a role also. For me, I mean, my own mental health was not in the best shape throughout my design education. Having that realization and ownership of that, your own awareness of where you are in your own mental health and how much it has cost you in your own supposed growth is how I saw it at that point. I said, maybe this is what I have as a resource to work on, and I can really offer that because I have an insight that's a very personal and deep one. I can do something about that. So I think that's the mindset that came to me was like, okay, what am I? So if, of course, it was when I was looking at from a space of losing what I had done so far, I shifted the mindset to, okay, this is actually a resource that's much deeper than the skill set I've gained. So that really anchored me to make this jump much more easily in that sense. And then for me, it was never about leaving my professional learning, so to speak. It was only about transferring that from here to there. So when I do exterior design, how can I transfer that to a bike project? When I do a bike project, how can I transfer that to this modular vehicle for underprivileged? When I learn from that, how can I transfer that to this multidisciplinary studio I'm going to work with? When I've done that, can I do freelance work and apply it there? Can I do it in a real estate brand or not? So for me, it was like always on a constant backbone. Design was always the backbone I was working with. So that kind of eased me in the process. I still believe, and I am, in fact, using the same backbone to work with, but maybe in different proportions and different capacities and for different outputs, so to speak. So I mean, for me, I still don't feel I've left anything I've learned so far. So it was never leaving. It was only realizing that I'm gaining so much, and only going for the gains is what really helped me.
Yeah.
When I was scared about the losses, I never moved anywhere. To be honest, yeah, I would say that. It was tricky. I would say it was easy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very insightful, Abu, like honestly, because I think one like when you are into a creative community or a creative scene and you're educating yourself, I think on instances when you try to develop a certain skill set, every time you educate yourself, there's something more to learn, right? And doesn't mean that what you've learned behind is something you can't impose into what you would really like. So yeah, I think one thing leads to another. uh, uh, and then you started working in a center who was working for for children's mental health.
Yeah. So this is where the systems practice course that we discussed earlier with Swati and I did came into picture. This is my experiment. I said mental health.
How did it kick off? All right. How did you started it?
So it was very straightforward. I said design. I want to make like a design research project initially on mental health and where I can apply my design skills. So I literally found organizations and sort of I knew people in my own realm, in my own circle who were experiencing either as directly impacting by mental health issues or having care, somebody to care for who was mentally challenged or mentally ill or mentally ill health they were experiencing. So I chose to first speak to them. My sort of user research was that to extremes and mainstreams and different dimensions. So I spoke to somebody who was working with a service provider. I spoke to somebody who was running their own organization in Delhi. I spoke to somebody who was seeking mental health service. I spoke to somebody who was a mother of a schizophrenic. So that really told me, and then I did my research on the side as well. And a combination of those things meant the answer was to start early childhood. And there's a lot of disease burden, not just mental health issues happen if you have early childhood adversity, but the disease burden of mental health in early age, of bad mental health, is very, very adversity in growing up is very, very high. And that kind of insight led me sort of to drive it, and just took up a call. And this is organization called Udyam, which runs an open house. So on Eid, I remember I go there and I come back, and at some point I've done this research, and I'd call them up, and say, hey, I would like to work on this area. Would you be interested to help me run a pilot? And they're like, I'm not sure if this organization, but look, this guy called Vignesh is doing something in that area. Why don't we give him a call? So I meet him, and I start doing this course and doing this sort of practice. It's called, where you practice and reading and learning all in combination with this course of systems practice. So yeah, I think that is where I started off. So it gave me, I had a lot of literature I read. I don't say a lot of it, but I read some interesting literature and books and stuff like that on the matter. And for the first time, I got to put real names and real stories and real challenges to it. And Vignesh was doing it for the internet, running the after school center before me. He was there for like 6 months before me, on the same path, you could say, with the intent of bringing joyful learning to children.
Yeah.
And when I came in, I said, maybe I can be the mental health part of the entire game that we're running here. So that, yeah, there's a lot of on-ground realization. And sort of when you're working with children, it's actually not so easy, especially children who are unregulated in their own bodies, children who are not treated very well at home or in schools for that matter, because it kind of goes hand in hand in that sense. It makes you realize the gravity of the issue at hand, and forces you to reconsider your own original positions about how to solve this issue. And eventually realize you can't really solve it. You can only facilitate things. You can't really solve anything, and you can't really solve or save anybody in that manner.
Yeah.
So those are very powerful realizations, in fact, that really happened when I sort of started working on the ground. It was quite massive. When you have a child who's been dropped out of school, and when you try to teach him math and you see him sweating profusely out of anxiety, you only wonder what experiences he must have had with learning before, that he finds this emotional reaction becomes his first one, being anxious and all of that. So when you have children who are actually even sort of sniffing whitener, and they're coming to us, and they realize the background they come from is very clear correlation of broken households. This one child who was an outsider in this set of outsiders. So he was the outcast in these set of outcasts, in these marginalized children, you could call them. The children would sort of look at him, say, "Oh, sir, don't allow this guy. He's a nuisance." He went to jail because he was picked up and taken to police station. I wouldn't say jail, because he hit a teacher and all of that. But he sit down with him and he does all this sort of. He tried doing some whitener stuff in here and there, and he has a gang who does that. Similar age children. These are not old children. These are like 12, 13-year-olds, or even younger than that.
Wow.
But they're actually coping. They're actually coping for all the challenges, all the difficulties back home that they're not able to deal with, to be honest. So it gives you a real stories, real names, and real faces to work with, and that's very powerful. And then you start realizing that, then look at, okay, why? And you start asking whys and whys and whys, and you say, okay, maybe inequality is a big issue. Poverty is a big issue. Housing is a big issue. So if education has to improve, all these factors have to coalesce with each other, and communities have to come together to really make it happen. So it really opens your mind in terms of systemic change, or this sort of fancy labels as designers are being world changes that you carry. It's actually shattered sometimes because the gravity is so big. Like, okay, dude, you got to reconsider all these learnings you have so far. It puts you and your positioning of how to approach things in a larger perspective. So it is massive. One of my best learning experiences has been that doing this reading. Of course, my colleague Vignesh was a big shift also, because we read, we practiced, and we reflected together. So this triaging of this triangulation of learning strategies is like so potent, and there's so much growth that happened for both of us in that journey. Was quite massive. So we ran experiments, and we sort of found ways to run experiments. It gives a lot of confidence to deal with uncertainties, and I think I carried that now also in all of my work. And I'm able to do new things very easily because I'm so open to learning, and I'm so able to learn much more than I would be before. I'm not saying that have a super massive, learning capability. Suddenly, it was always there. It's there in all of us.
Yeah.
I was able to unlearn something and tap into it. The years. I think this after school experience was very, very massive. Yeah. I can even share some stories of some children who'd steal, for example.
Yeah.
Who'd steal some money from a bag and go buy chips and give to every other child. It baffles you. Why is he doing that? If he took the money, why isn't he eating for himself? But if you really look deeper, try to probe deeper of his own family background, loss of affection at home or lack of affection at home because he's a first child to a twice divorcee mother in a domestic household which is abusive for her as well. So this is actually the act of stealing and was also one way to gain attention. So when he was getting a lot of care and love, when he would get that, he would suddenly stop. We saw that stabilizing a little bit, but of course, it sort of went back to the original position, often like a spring, because the original conditions were not changed at home. So yeah, it was massive. It told me that this also is not enough, is what I was at the end of it. This afterhood sending is also a bandit to the original wound that actually needs to be healed. So yeah, it's one of the most fascinating and most sort of powerful learning experiences I've had is the after school center.
So children used to come there after their schools. How did?
Yeah, I mean, and maybe I can talk. Yeah, I'm talking enough about my learning strategies and my growth, but maybe it's worth talking about them a lot more. This is basically an after-school setting. It's a drop-in center, so you don't have to mandatorily be there. We just try to make it fun enough for them to come down and hang out and just chill. To be honest, more often than not. So they come in. The first hour is just play, because play is a huge role in sort of children's lives and development. It's a very proven thing now. There's a lot of play is a big tool of learning. Children learn by playing. They model reality, the larger reality in a playful way. For example, when you bring Lego to them, they build the JCB that they see on the road, right? They're actually playing the reality. It's very. I mean, you learn so much sort of in work with children. So play is one massive factor that we have. So first hour is just play. They come with Coco Cup physical games. We have board games. We have chess for some of them. So they just come and play. And the second hour is kind of come and learning. So actually learning what you want. It's a democratic learning space. So the norms also, there's a lot of participatory co-creation strategies that we had. They set the norms. They also sometimes decide the consequences together as a group, as a consensus. So providing agency to children to define for themselves what they would like to do is actually the main shift that we're trying to create in this space actually. So they often do take help from us for homework and all of that is one part of it. But we've also run some lessons and sort of here and there. So for example, I would go and teach them drawing, which of course was my asset to sort of share with them. We also had like a safe space where if there was any sort of emotional outburst, which would often happen, a lot of fight, we could go and sit down, have a chat about it. So we called it the peace room. A peace room would be if I had a fight, we both would be sat down. We will have a conversation about it and help you regulate and understand. Okay, if you are feeling angry and it's a first reaction, how do you regulate yourself? What do you do? So breathing exercise and teaching them to take a pause, and all of that was happening in that safe space and safe room. And of course, I mean, I think of course excursions are other things that is like a cherry on the top. You take them to a science museum, to Lal Bagh, or to other gardens in Bangalore to let them see and stuff like that. So it is, I think it's unfortunately, of course, the pandemic means we're not able to do enough at all. The kind of thing we kind of democratic, safe, joyful learning spaces is how we would define a center right now. And we have two of them now in Bangalore, one in JD Mada and one in Anjanapura.
Yeah, it's very insightful, Abu. And also, thanks for recommending me the movie you had shared. It's Gabor. It's by Gabor Mate, right? If I'm
Gabor Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate.
Yeah. And I think it was an eye-opening documentary, and I love the way how they connected the dots from having child traumas to what it reflects in a later phase of your life. So I think that's very important. Even for the parents, it's very important that they are making sure about their kids. And everything from their education system to to their basic to the basic support they look for. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's very important, and it molds you in a way. And again, I loved how he mentioned that how you gain wisdom from all these suffering. So
Absolutely.
I'd also add it to the description. There's this podcast also with Gabor Mate. How did you react to
Yeah.
it? I'm sure you also had a lot of
Yeah, I mean,
ideas.
I've been a big fan of his work, and going through my own healing journey. I mean, his wisdom has been profound, I would say. I mean, of course, it aligns a lot with the Sufi literature, which I'm also very fond of, in terms of you have to burn down to be able to, rise from the ashes like the phoenix. And some of the points that Rumi actually speak of that way of being in that sense. I think it's been very profound to really realize and to become very authentic, to not chase ghosts, actually, to not chase shadows. We often think we are looking for something real, we're trying to find something real. We're actually not. We're actually chasing our own absences that we haven't had, the necessary belonging that we were meant to have as being this nature of humans are of this nature to have a sense of belonging, to be nurtured and cared for, to be loved. I think we are chasing all of that in the external realities, but I think in fact the loss and harm is inside. So you may be you may run and sort of be at the Mount Everest if you would like to be, but unless you change what is inside, you're not gonna receive that fullness of being in that sense. So it's like a stone. It's like your being is like a cup, and
Yeah,
all these prior experiences like a stones that are kept inside. Unless you take them out, you can't have a whole cup because you actually filled so much that defines how you are receiving and how much you're not able to receive from the external world and absorb things. So for me, his work has meant that I've become much more like I think I think it's something we discussed the
yeah.
other day as well, that you learn to not bullshit yourself very importantly. You learn to also not become hard on yourself. You learn about yourself in a very compassionate, honest way, that you deal with everything as an opportunity to learn more about you. Everything that you are so prepared to label as wrong and bad and terrible and horrific, or you not being good enough and all of that, is actually a signpost always to investigate. Hang on, there's something very interesting happening. Oh, why is this happening? So I think his teaching for me has been, or the way I have really took it up, is actually to be extremely curious in the face of what
Yeah,
may seem like the most abhorrent thing. For example, the way his work with addiction and incarcerated individuals is massive on its own. The fact that he would usually work what would usually seem like an outcast from the society, right? These are people the society says there's a certain boundary of legalities, and if you are outside it, or they're like they're legalities and their norms, right? Because homeless people don't found are not found in the norm. They're not productive.
yeah,
The world sees them as in a certain way, and they're like outcasts in that sense. And the legalities, you're a murderer and XYZ. But the way he frames that, again, there are sort of factors which have caused them to be in this way, and the losses that they've had, we're only perpetuating by keeping them jailed up and the real loss that, I mean, the what they need is actually healing, and what they're giving them is further punishment. They're already punished for not having the appropriate environment to begin with,
yeah,
and those factors lead to a certain act which is certainly outside our legal boundaries, and then you punish them further, and not solving the original issue. So it's a very deeper layer of approaching anything, to be honest. Of course, it gave me a lot of space to for my own journey and healing in that sense. But at the same time, it's been like a massive tool to look at anything for that matter. To not buy into the apparent, to not look at the surface and say this is it, to not look at the fact, but say, okay, what circumstances led to the fact, and then what backgrounds led to the circumstances, and to be able to triangulate your understanding from all those layers, so to speak. So I think it's been, I think, powerful is what how I would describe his teachings. And anybody who's uh, even if they're not interested, they may think they're not interested in mental health, but if they look at his work, I think they will be enticed to look deeper and probe deeper and sit down with themselves
yeah.
and their own shadows. I think which is probably what they are not doing.
Yeah, it's definitely for all, man, Abu. And yeah, some great insights there. How do you how do you think people should do a check on themselves if they are doing good mentally? Because sometimes we think that, okay, like talking about design, in the design spectrum, we are trying to build a portfolio to get that one internship, to crack that one
Yeah.
job out there. And in the whole process, we don't care about our forget about physical health. We don't even care about our mental being, that if we how we are coping it, or how do you
Yeah.
even do better, right? Because every day you wake up to uh, uh, you have a doubt on yourself, and you always remind
Yeah.
yourself that you're not good enough, right? Which also I think, how do you keep a check on it? And if someone's feeling that right now, how do you think that they should handle it?
Yeah. I mean, I think you've kind of touched the thread already by this using the term "you're not good enough." Um, uh, Self-worth and self-esteem, for example, is often they're chasing in outward ways. By we feel that if you became this extremely great designer, suddenly you will be worthy of worthy of what? Of all those losses you endured in your childhood of not having enough of it, of being told that only if you achieve this, you're worthy enough of care and love, and sort of, to be able to or appreciation for that matter. So I think it's important to recognize the voice in your head, and it's the nature of the voice in the head which actually is the biggest marker for you to tell you if you're too harsh on yourself all the time. That's a great sign to start saying, "Hang on, guys, this is actually not a norm. Actually, this is this is an exception. This is actually not healthy. It may be the norm in a sense that there are a lot of people who may have these voices in their head, but if you have that harsh, critical, it is the case. But if you have that harsh, critical critique, a little man in your head, which homunculus, or I think it's the earlier idea of brain was like that. There's a little man in your head who operates you. So if there's a little homunculus in your head who's telling you this is you're not good enough, or you may, and always focuses on the negatives and sort of is very self-critical, self-deprecating, and it's hard to please. This inner self is hard to please because you've never you're not appreciative of where you have come so far. Then that's a good sign. If you're also feeling the very subtle things where people always mistake that things like procrastination, that we all so much talk about procrastination and not being productive and all of that. But often if you find yourself hung up in those chains of procrastinations, for example, in a very outwardly way, that's also one way to realize there's things to deal with. There are barriers in you, or emotional barriers, or dams, you could call them, that is not allowing the flow to happen, or you're not allowing you to be in sync with what is going on around you. And I think then you kind of, if you have a lot of sense of shame and guilt inside you for that matter, which is actually the label to it is you're not good enough, but the feeling is shame and guilt, in a lot of ways, for the way you are, for not fitting in, for not being good enough. So I think those are the kind of labels you want to really, really, um, uh, you need to look out for. Those are the signposts, you could call it. I wouldn't say red flags, because we all have in some degree and shape. But certainly those are the initial things you need to really consider it from a what would usually pass as a normative, actually. But actually, it's actually a glass ceiling you may not realize is there. On the other end, of course, if you're feeling long periods of sadness, if you're not feeling a sense of pleasure in what you're doing, and any sense of motivation, if you're finding it hard to get up, those are the bigger red signposts that and then you should try and find good professional help, because often your friend circle also is not educated enough to give you the right support.
Yeah.
And sometimes in their own zealousness may cause subtle harms, of course, in their own ways, by not saying the right things, by not being the right way to you. So you have to be a little careful around where you go to seek support as well, and how you do it. And I think we should just destigmatize the idea of seeking and getting help. It's funny because I think the person who actually needs it doesn't realize that he can ask for help. It's a very fascinating.
True.
It's very yeah. I can. There's some very interesting books that I've come across. I can share that, because they're not built in. They're not grown up in an environment where seeking help is the norm,
Yeah.
and being supported is the norm. So you both lack the support, and you both and the ability to seek support. So you see, it's a double whammy. You could say, not a double-edged sword, but I think finding those safe spaces and your own zones, you could call it, is very important. And sometimes, I mean, confide in your friends, but in the ones you can trust, who can keep your trust in that sense, to be able to protect your own vulnerabilities in that sense, is very, very important. And some part, I think, eventually, when you start owning it, you realize that there's nothing more powerful than being honest to yourself and to how you're feeling and how you're doing. And it'll give you a new lens to look at reality in general. I think it's super important. It makes you more a more productive person if that's what you're chasing. It makes you a better designer if that's what you're chasing.
Yeah.
Only if you became aware of how you're feeling and how you're doing, and you sort of found ways to regulate your own emotions and find supportive relationships around you. Yeah.
Because I think it also reflects yourself. It also reflects your work, being a creative, right? And if
Yeah.
you're not in a best state of yourself, especially mental state, it also, you're also compromising with what you're creating. So
absolutely. I mean, you're right. I mean, I just want to add, sorry to cut you over there. Key, unlike other fields, or unlike most other fields, I would say, or maybe I don't know enough about other fields, I would not use that. But in design, let's say, that will be more accurate. More often than not, you're putting yourself out there, right? You're putting your own self. This is would you say, this is my passion to be a designer, even my passion to be. And then when you're putting yourself and you're criticized, and you don't have the right way to understand that, and if you have this own inner critical voice, it becomes a very difficult thing to create a learning environment for yourself, to take that in the right spirit and in the right proportion and in the right context. So you can also hamper in that. So I think you're particularly tender and vulnerable being a designer because you're so subjective in this field, and because you're passionate about it and you put yourself out there. So I think that's a key distinction as a designer. I think it's particularly, as creative, is particularly important that you not sort of not use your trauma to. And I hate this celebration of traumatized artists who are like Van Gogh, who was mentally ill, and then sort of I think this myth we have to also break away from, that to be a creative you have to be really depressed and sad and have to harness all that negative energy to be creative. It's horrific. It's such a productive way of looking at things and people, that they're a tool to that end and they're nothing in themselves. So,
it's very like I've seen, as you mentioned about this incident, I've seen myself people making fun of artists and painters who suffered with the mental issues. But what pointers do you give yourself, as you said that you have to put yourself out there, consistently teaching yourself things, and how do you figure out about keeping a check, and before going for a therapy, for example, how do you think that we should give ourselves some pointers to do a check? Because I think it also reflects on our productivity, right? You don't because I think that is something I felt it myself, right? When I had to make a portfolio, and where I had to work for 6 to 7 hours per day in order to complete my deadlines, but I couldn't do it just because maybe I was not in a better state, and I didn't know about it, that okay, what's going wrong, it's just me, that I just want to chill and I don't want to work, which won't take me anywhere. What pointers do you give in such scenario? I think, and which is very normal also, right? I've seen people talking about it. Okay, I don't feel like working, and they don't have enough reasons for it, because apparently you need to put down those labor hours in order to putting yourself out there as a designer and as a professional. So what pointers do you think you should give yourself?
You rightly said, if you don't feel motivated on a regular basis, if you don't feel, if you're constantly feeling burnt out, a lot of times when you have emotional needs that are not fulfilled, or emotional weight that is not being considered, or or cleared off, it drains you internally. In fact, if you're feeling perpetually exhausted, tired, if you're not sleeping well, if you're not eating well, if you not have a sense of well-being in whatever you're doing, that's a sign. I don't feel well doing this exercise. This 6 months plot, I have tried to exert myself, but I don't feel good about this. I don't feel well. I have to try so hard to get up in the morning and bring myself to start that act itself. So lack of motivation and lack of bad sleep that may happen to you, insomnia, for example, nightmares sometimes you also get if you're really sort of having heavy emotional labels that you have dealt with and you're not reconciled. You have I think you have also maybe addictive strategies that you may run into if you are too much on your phone, sometimes pornography, sometimes even it's too much alcohol, or you get into all this drug scene and sort of too much weed or whatever, too much of anything. If you see, even work, too much of work, sometimes we because culturally we have said some things are bad, and we've considered something okay because in the name of productivity we allow addiction to work to happen.
Yeah.
If you're doing too much work without taking care of yourself, that is also a massive, massive sign you're not doing enough. You're not doing well, to be honest. So doing anything without a sense of well-being, without an inner sense of joy and spirit, you could say, it's kind of a sign for you to hang on, there's something is not working out. And the key is to chase that tail from there on, is to follow the trail from there on. So hang on, why is that? And not in a way. Often, what way we get stuck is where the voice in your head becomes such a crucial component. We may have the scent of this, things not being all right, but you have this notion, oh, you're not good enough actually, or you're not hardworking enough. Actually, you're not. It's your fault. You shame. It's a cycle of guilt and vicious cycle of shame that occurs instead of having to honestly follow the trail of things not being all right. So it keeps you trapped in that sense.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I think so those are the kind of signals: not enough motivation, not in a sense of joy and spirit in when you do things. If you're not feeling energized after having done something meaningful, if you're not finding joy in having meeting people, if you're finding yourself isolated in a lot of ways, if you're feeling lonely in a crowd, not sleeping well, not eating well, all those combinations, I think things is I think what you need to really consider as some of the flags or some of the signposts, I would call it, to seek help sometimes and to have a chat with somebody you really confide with.
Yeah, well said, Abu. I think, as you mentioned about the sleep, there's this TED talk I recently watched with Ajaz and the Non-Zero crew. It was about "Sleep is Your Superpower" by Matt Walker, and this guy mentioned gave some bizarre facts about sleeps and how we underestimate sleep, like how it makes our immunity deficient towards a lot of things, and also impacts our productivity. So I think sleep is also
Yeah,
one thing that we neglect a lot, right? Because
absolutely.
yeah, and he's a he's I think he's a doctor, and he has spent a lot of years into the scene.
Is this Huberman?
No, it's Matt Walker. It's a TED talk. Yes, I'll add it. Let's just add all
Sure,
these
sure.
pointers and some nice links to the description, so that the listeners can have an idea what we are talking about, and they can learn some from it probably. Yeah, it's a very important, yeah, Abu, and I think we it's once you once you try to fix yourself and you are at a place where you are producing work, being a creative, because sometimes it can be very tiring.
Hey, no. Sorry. I just want to pause there. Uh, See, that's in that language itself is some harm already. The fact that you associate an individual with production, with productivity, and not more than that. The individual
Yeah.
by default is worthy enough. He doesn't have to produce anything to become worthwhile, to be appreciated as a human being, to deserve love, care, and a sense of belonging anywhere. The
Wow.
fact that the culture is in sort of incorporated this idea in our head that you are only worthy of appreciating or being, so only if you reach that milestone or that peak is where you deserve to sort of be acknowledged and sort of and all of that. So I think this is this is also something that Gabor Mata loosely touches upon that.
Yeah.
In fact, it was very interesting that in our fellowship, in the CHLP fellowship, that I'm one of the core team members. We have a very interesting cohort of doctors who work at, super specialities like AIMS and stuff like that. And we have a lot of pressure.
Tell us about your current initiative, Abu.
So this is, So I'll probably take a route from here to there. First of all, I think this notion of productivity we need to really challenge and say, I'm only worth if I produce things. If I were not to, if I'm just a tree planter who doesn't necessarily get appreciation from the outside world, it doesn't mean that he's not doing a worthwhile job. So the way you look at production and what we associate as an outcome of having produced something meaningful, we need to really reconsider. And I also wonder, are we chasing ghosts and shadows again in that sense?
I think that is something I need to teach myself also.
No, that's okay. I was not meaning to point it to you, but I think this is a general norm across the board. It's not just you.
It's very normal.
So anchoring yourself beyond your work is very important. Anchoring yourself in something that's much more real than work. And when I say real, it's a lot more. It's kind of inner spirit and having an inner anchor and inner motivation more than external extrinsic ones. I think one of the key factors for that has been driven me to find meaning and sort of peace with myself in that sense. This fellowship itself, maybe I'll just jump across. It's been a beautiful experience so far. So I am one of the core team members. It's been running for 17 years, the SOCHARA. SOCHARA has been a public health resource group who worked on various levels in the communities, on the policy level, locally, internationally, and all of the other levels. Very fascinating, grounded people who have had sort of very insightful and they have been a leader, I would say. And there's no leader in such, but they have been one of the only avenues who have talked about community health as an approach to achieve health for all. In that bucket of that goal sits CHLP, Community Health Learning Program, which is the goal to find those young people who are community leaders in that sense, which can mobilize communities to become more healthy in various levels. And given the specific Indian context of all the social, political, SEPCE, socioeconomic, political, ecological, cultural factors that they're embedded in, how do you find health within this context and paradigm? So we have a cohort of 35 people, 38 in fact, 3 sisters amongst them. These are Christian Catholic sisters we're talking about, and 35 others who actually from 14 different parts of the country, and in varying capacities and professional roles and journeys. Some of them are doctors, most of them, I think 7 or 8 of them are doctors, some of them MPH, that's Masters in Public Health. One of them works in AIMS, which is one of the premier institutes in India. 2 of them work in rural parts of Assam, if I'm not wrong, and sort of in the northern eastern part of it. And they've traveled extensively thanks to their work in Doctors Without Borders and stuff like that. So very, very fascinating. Of course, this is one layer of it. Of course, there are also people who have deeply worked in rural communities of Madhya Pradesh for years and years, and 20 years of experience in nutrition. So I think, I think it's been a fascinating process. First of all, so for me, learning is my sort of my inner joy comes from learning, to be very honest. And this was and I think and CHLP has built a certain approach to learning. I think it builds on Paulo Freire's model of learning, which goes from banking system of education, where the teachers tell it goes from the notes of the teacher to the notes of the student without passing through anybody's head. Is how the general education system is defined. And this is more sort of experiential learning and learning from practice. So action learning. These are very different. So anyways, so I think I have a lot of fun for the fact that this is in that space. And I was studying myself, maybe education and technology is a combination, something I would really love and enjoy and find a lot of fun doing. And this came across within the same organization. We were translating this 17-year-old fellowship. It's been running for 17 years, creating these leaders who end up doing really massive, deep work in their own ways in communities. These are not one-time parachute-based, parachute in and parachute out of communities to provide aid the deep work to transform communities and enable them and sort of empower them to seek their own health in that sense.
Yeah.
So we are digitizing that. So I'm kind of, I mean, on paper, I'm supposed to be systems designer, but I don't, I just call myself a core team member. But I think for me, it's been massive as a learning process too, because there's a lot of processes to build to make the development happen, to think about the delivery process, to align ourselves with this pedagogy that we think we are doing in terms of, this is loosely speaking, social constructivism, which says that you learn from by building upon your own experiences and in a social setting and through interactions. Massive learning happens by building upon what you already had and with other people and in interactions with them. So I think it's been a very sort of a radical shift in how you see learning in that sense. So it's been very meaningful for me in that world. And the fact that I'm able to apply my design skills in a very distinct way, in not just having to aid in the curation of the platform, which is an open source learning platform. We're using Moodle. I think world over, it's probably one of the biggest platforms. It's open source, and all universities across the world mostly use that. So I think I kind of lead that LMS process, right from curating some of the key features to even right now I'm also in the support role to help people deal and sort of understand and improve the LMS itself, and also in the module development process, production pipeline. It's a combination of pre-recorded plus live sessions with also mentorship and field projects. So for me, it's been massive because I think it's just a beautiful and sort of extensive exercise in service designs and design operations. So you're just like you're mapping the entire journey, but you're also testing the journey on the ground with your own limitations. So you have to think about, okay, we are saying we want to promise this to the user or to the learners, but are we building systems to be able to deliver that on time effectively? Are we building enough contingencies to make sure we are running this smoothly over the course of 9 months? And stuff.
Sorry to interrupt you, Abu. Who should go for such fellowships? Who should offer such?
Anybody. I think if anybody who's interested in community and community's health primarily, and wants to do deep work and is deeply invested in that, they could apply for it, but they have to have some criteria are there. These are master's student, postmasters. You can apply straight away without any field experience. But if you've done bachelor's, you have to have 3 years of, substantial evidence to show that you are motivated enough to work in the long term. Because this is a marathon you're running. This is not a sprint. You come in and just run away and go off. So it's basically a lot of it is motivation. It's very alternative methods of education. Also, there's no people don't come for certification. They come for the solidarity. They come for the network. They come to find this really amazing people who have done the journey so far and done tremendous change and transformation and impact in their own work. You come to access all of that, and you come to sort of find ways to how you already know that you want to do this, and you're here to just build upon that. And just find a group of lifelong friends, to be honest, because they're really fun, very interesting folks you're working with, and very so diverse. So it's fascinating. It's been very, very meaningful in that sense.
And how's the future like? Like, did you kick off your course, or it's still happening?
We have. We already finished 1 week of mental health. We started with mental health because actually a course called Community Health Learning Program in context of pandemic.
Okay.
So first of all, it's very. I feel very grateful in a pandemic that I feel very in touch with reality, that I'm able to do something that's actually responding to it. The biggest crisis we have known in our lifetime. So I think there's a lot of gratitude in me that I am part of such a process. And of course, I've done COVID work before also with some of the governments briefly in wave 1. But this feels like more long-term rather than sort of stopgap solutions in that sense. So, what was the question again? I lost track of. Was the question about?
I just asked you like who should all go for this course, and also did you kick off the course?
Yeah, we have. So
it starts with mental health, you mentioned.
Yeah, the reason we chose mental because the pandemic has shown that the bigger pandemic actually is mental health, and it's on much further from the virus because livelihoods have been deeply impacted. Other illnesses have also been impacted because all government and public health resources have gone into COVID suddenly. So people with issues of dialysis who seemingly manageable diseases are actually acting up because they don't have the same support system as before. So yeah, I mean, it's actually started up. It's very fascinating. Mental health is the first 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Is actually mental health. It's very important conversation. Actually, that much I think.
yeah.
It's a lot of
It's
fun.
great, Abu, man. You're doing this. I think it's a need of the hour where we talk about mental health and make this a normal norm, especially it's for everyone. So whether you are a
Absolutely.
designer or you are an artist or an engineer or whoever, mental health is something which should come first after everything, and also physical health.
Yeah, it's linked, isn't it? I mean, you'll be surprised how intertwined they are and how
Yeah.
much they inform each other.
Yeah, becoming the best version of yourself. I think it's so good to know that you are the kind of work you are doing, and the kind of how you've molded yourself as a designer and using design knowledge to what you are currently doing. What are the tips you would like to give to the people who are trying to make their way in design?
Oof. Okay, that's a big one. I think just remember why you're doing it
Hmm.
and what keeps you going. And I think that rest will follow.
Yeah.
And when you're asking this question, just be very, very honest with yourself. Um, and if you're not able to do any three of these, and then again, this is also try and understand why this you're not able to do that also with yourself. Right. So
Yeah.
I think yeah. So again, if I may reiterate, why you're doing this, what keeps you going, is I think one of the two key questions. I mean, two of the key questions that you must be able to work with in this. Um, yeah, and don't lie to yourself. Don't
Yeah.
just don't just don't do that.
It takes a lot from you, man, when you lie to yourself, and it wastes a lot of your time and energy. It also
Yeah, but
screws you up physically also.
yeah, and I don't mean to. I think sorry, I don't. When I say don't lie to yourself, like, it seems very accusative. I don't mean in that
Yeah,
sense.
yeah,
Often we're obscured from our own sort of realities. So just sit with that is what I would say more than don't lie to yourself. Just sit with yourself a lot more, and yeah, yeah, maybe that's the one thing I would say to anybody, not just creators in that sense.
And what's next? What's coming up for you, Abu?
I think for me, I think since I've traveled in the inside world a lot, in my own inside world and all this mental escape, and the next aim is just to find ways to, um, uh, take this. I mean, there are some ideas about this. I mean, I'm very keen to find ways this to make this program much more sustainable. Community health learning program. We're finding ways to see if we can increase our reach. Can we have standalone courses on mental health specifically for and improve access to it by not making those barriers? Education XYZ. So I think the immediate goal is that, to be honest, is to find ways to I mean, my inner sort of dream is to also find ways to even sort of streamline this once,
Yeah.
and that's sort of something I can be really proud of that I've been part of and I've learned and gained so much from. And then maybe move on to see what excites me next. I think I'm a shifter in that sense that I'd like to move, and I enjoy growth that comes from putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. So I hope to keep doing that. I hope to. I'm not pushing myself, but going where I find growth in that sense. Yeah, I don't have strict answers, but this is what it looks like.
All right, Abu. Thanks for the inspiring conversation and sharing your experiences, and also taking time because I know how much I had to ask you to get some time for this.
Please cut this out.
Thanks for
I'm
doing
kidding.
this. So yeah, I see
No
you
worries.
soon, Abu. Right.
Okay. We'll catch up. Thanks a lot for doing this. I think I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I did not prepare for it, and maybe that's a good thing because I also did not realize I would share all of this. At
Yeah.
least the initial bit, I thought, I mean, I didn't know that I would share those initials. I think it also made me realize some things for myself as well. So it's very meaningful for me to also read that process. Yeah, good luck. I think you're doing a good job with all of this. I think it's going really well. And yeah, I think hope to see you soon at some point.
Yeah. Cheers, Abu.
All right. Cheers. Take care.
Peace out.
Bye.